today, I mean, we spoke about. I mean, we've had lots of conversations, and I've known you now for a little while, and you've been on the Humble Mind podcast before, so it's great to have you back. Thank you again for your time. And
Oh,
today's
somebody came on the weekend who said they saw your podcast.
hey,
Yeah,
woo,
yeah, yeah. It was something about it was must have been the one I did with you.
nice, world
I was talking
domination,
about
baby, one
yeah,
person at a time. Yeah,
that's it.
lovely. That's good to hear.
Mm,
Um, we a lot of the stuff that you and I have spoken about before, and what we're talking about today is the role of stories,
yeah,
and how they can teach us, so many things. How they can unlock wisdom in the body. They
yeah,
can help us to reframe the past, think differently about the present, and obviously the imagination for the future as well.
yeah,
But what's interesting as well is the role of not just stories, but mythology
yes.
in particular, because stories and mythology, maybe we can start there in a way, kind of that they're similar, obviously, but there's a sort of a difference in a sense, or the
Yeah,
way that we use them and the way that we remember them through the ages. Maybe we
yeah.
can start there, how you kind of define or look at the
We
difference
started.
in roles.
We
Yeah,
we started. Oh,
we
okay.
we
Now
have
we
started.
started. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess a story is just a story, and it's just a set of sequence of facts or happenings. Where it becomes mythological is when it contains a meaning, when you create a meaning out of it. So I see how things work now. So you take a lesson out of it, or draw a conclusion, or make an assumption.
Mm,
That's what goes onto the subconscious mind.
mm,
That I know how that works now. I've seen that. I'll watch out for that again. It's an observation of a story. The lesson, if you like, that you take from a story becomes a myth. Yeah, it becomes a myth, and a myth is only a myth as long as it creates meaning. It doesn't mean it's true, but it has power as long as you believe it. Yeah, yeah.
mm,
As long
mm,
as you buy into it. It's so a lot of the things that are on our in our subconscious mind we picked up when we were very absorbent, very young, and we never get to question them, and so, until we do question them and say, oh, does that really work for me? And probably not. It did when I was 5. It kept me safe and around big people, but these days, no, I don't. I don't need to think about that. I mean, a very common one around, you may have come across yourself, Alex, is somebody saying, I'm not good enough. Well, what kind of statement is that? About what are you not good at? Or everything, anything. Well, when you're young and everyone's bigger than you are, and they're all more competent and powerful, that probably feels true. But we can outgrow that sort
yeah,
of stuff.
yeah,
So our mythology is what we take as meaningful. Yeah,
yeah.
it was meaningful. Yeah.
I love this idea of kind of almost redefining mythology a little bit, because I think in the kind of the modern era, if you like, where we're obsessed with technology and progress and moving forward and looking ahead all the time, it almost feels like mythology, or the meaning of myths, can kind of be lost or sort of left on the sidelines a little bit, because we equate mythology to something that's not true or fictitious,
Yeah.
or not really having any value, because it's a myth,
It's
in the
just a
same
myth.
way. Yeah, it's just a myth. It's not true. It doesn't matter and holds no value. Fuck that. I'm
Yeah.
just looking at the future.
We want the facts.
Yeah, exactly. We want the facts. Don't give me. So it's unfortunate in a way that there's kind of been that almost mistaken way of defining mythology as something that is sort of not true, and because of that, it sort of doesn't hold value. But really, mythology, it contains some of the deepest truths about
Yeah.
our story as humanity.
Tremendous power in mythology.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you
yeah.
get whole cultures that are based on particular types of mythology. I mean, if you take the Greeks and the Romans, for instance, which are very influential, they had this martial, masculine mythology, and it created empires, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Whereas other cultures didn't have that. Other cultures had a more feminine mythology. I mean, the Brits had a great martial mythology. That's what created their empire,
Mm.
and they took a lot of that. Were inspired from that from the Greeks and the Romans, of course. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so looking at that, and maybe in your work as well, you're a psychotherapist, but you've also founded charities. You've worked a lot with people, in various different settings for decades
yeah.
now. How have you kind of wound in using story, using mythology, and the imagination ultimately to sort of help people to realize different types of stories about themselves?
Well, but by sharing stories, really. I mean, there's lots of stories that we share, and people, different people find interest in different parts of the story because it's a reflection of them, you know. So if you ask me, well, what stories do you like to listen to? Well, you like to listen to them because there's something in it for you, you know. So I think there was a South American tribe. I've forgotten the name of them now, but their translation of the word for human beings actually literally translated as feathered, no, um, storytelling creatures without feathers. That's what we call. That's what we are.
I mean,
You
it's
know, in
accurate.
the end, we're all just a story. In the end, when we,
Yeah.
you know, in 100 years' time, you'll just be a story.
Without any bloody feathers. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So we are the leading actors in our own story, you know, and we're the leading actors in every scene, and other characters come and go, but we're the you know we're one long story really.
Mm, mm.
Um, so your question is, how do I work with people? Well, I listen to their stories really, and it's interesting that you know as a therapist you listen to people's stories all the time. And it's very interesting that what they emphasize is obviously something meaningful for them.
Mm.
So there's huge stories in the way that you and I could go to the same event tomorrow and then speak about it the day after, and to different people, you'd think it was a different event
Yeah.
because you know we're both having different experiences.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
So yeah, the way we tell stories and the stories that we find are very telling about what we need to know or
mm.
what we already think we know. And perhaps in the great stories themselves, you know, they actually tempt us into finding out more, you know. So the story I've been working in for the last little while is the Grail story, which is so rich. And it has its origins in with Gnosticism. And Gnosticism, the Gnostics believed that we all had to find our own story. You know, they didn't have a canon or a dogma. You know, they just told stories, and people found their way into resonating with those stories to find themselves. You know,
Mm.
and yeah, so the Parzival story has been a great one for men because it's the journey of a young man's initiatory path.
Yeah.
He meets various people along the way, and there's the great point where he's heroic. He's won the beautiful hand of the beautiful lady. He's beaten the bad guy. He's got the castle. He's become a knight. He's got all the accoutrements of everything he ever wanted. And then he calls himself, "I'm God's own knight." You know that I must be special. I'm the special boy. You know, nothing
Yeah.
could happen to me now. And of course, that's the point where it moves away from being a traditional heroic story into what we call a beyond the hero. You know, that's where it gets interesting.
Yes.
At that point, he goes out into the wilderness and gets lost. And when he's actually confronted with it with a moment of destiny,
Mm.
because he's identifying too much with the whole idea about being God's knight.
Yeah.
He doesn't ask the question that would unlock the wasteland. You know,
Is
that's right there. He's caught up in his ego, basically. Yeah.
is there a way, maybe just to get everyone kind of listening and watching this, on the same page? Because I had never heard the Parzival story before I heard it from you,
All
and
right.
I didn't know it existed. And I mean, maybe that's a reflection on modern education where we just focus on kind of Shakespeare and one or two others, and there's nothing else there, from what otherwise would be a rich canon. But is there a way that you could give us sort of 4 or 5 minutes, just a quick? I know it sucks to do this, but
Yeah,
just a
I'll
kind of a
try.
read through of the general story, and then we can dive into
Yeah.
it more deeply.
I'll try. Well, he was born. His mother took him away as a baby to keep him away from war and knights and everything else that she despised. She took him out, and he grew up in the woods. So he was very much nature's boy.
And in Wales, right? Just to put a
Well,
place to
yeah.
it.
Well, you could say it's in Wales. You could put it anywhere really, but I
Okay.
mean, it's yeah, it's the woods.
Okay.
He's a nature boy, and he
Yep.
learns to trust the woods and understand everything and be fascinated with everything that happens in nature. And his mother loves him, obviously unconditionally. So he has a kind of ideal upbringing.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, he has no male input. So he doesn't have the rules of the patriarchy or anything like that that he's actually been subject to. He eventually he realized he sees a vision in by meeting by happenstance. He meets knights and he sees a vision. This is what I want to be. This is my purpose, if you like, to go and be a knight. And having that vision, he has to break free of his mother. That's a very significant part of the initiatory process, of course. The pulling away from the regressive comfort of the mother to go out into the world. That's one of the things that happens there. We told that story of with young men, and when we actually dramatize it with the boy leaving the room and his mother begging him to stay. It's a quite poignant moment.
Mm.
Um, he finds his way to the High King's Castle, which you could call the establishment, if you like. And he has he meets the Red Knight, and through throwing a hidden sharp object into his eye, he kills the Red Knight so that he can steal his armor. So that's a very that's an often a pause for a conversation there. That was he right to do that, or was he reacted against being dismissed or humiliated,
Mm.
if you like.
It's a kind of a reckoning moment, that, isn't it, as well? Kind of his first sort of brush with, in a sense, adulthood, really, and
Yeah,
taking responsibility for his actions. And the question is,
yeah.
are you then going to take responsibility or not? And that's a particularly tough transition moment. Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you want to join the establishment? Do you want to? And he decides not to. The clown or the Joker, Jester, says, "Come on, you can have this knight's armor now. You can go back and be one of the knights." And he says, "No, thanks. I know myself for a bit of a wild thing yet. So he's off. And luckily enough, and they do say sometimes that, when you're ready, the teacher appears. He
Mm.
bumps into a curious old man who says, you look like you can't ride that horse properly and you're not carrying the shield very well. And this guy obviously knows about this because he's an expert in arms and the discipline of arms. And so he's lucky. He finds the teacher, which we all need. We all need a discipline and need someone to take time and find out what we can do with things. But the teacher oversteps his mark, really. He's a kind of a skills teacher, but he also says to him, you need to stop asking questions because only fools and spies ask questions. A wise knight, which you're hoping to be a knight, then a wise knight, never reveals his ignorance. So he said, remember that. So that was an interesting little bit because he's moving out of the skills mentor role into this more of a morality mentor, really.
Mm.
He then goes off and hears that there's a damsel in distress. Of course, you need one of those in any
Always.
heroic story, who's being threatened by this guy called Duke Aurelius, who's obviously the baddie. And he goes there, falls in love with the princess, of course, beats the bad guy in a contest, a joust, marries the beautiful princess, refurbishes the castle, which is in disrepair, and that might be where a lot of people's lives end. That's enough, really. Well, when I go back to the killing the Red Knight, throwing the little javelin that he'd concealed on him and threw it into the Red Knight's eye, that's where a lot of young men's lives end, right there. In some instinctive moment that can't be repaired, and they finish up in prison or somewhere else, and that's where life ends. But for a lot of people, we're aiming for success, and success looks like wealth and happy home, partner, all that sort of stuff. And you could say that that's what, he actually heroically does achieve that.
Mm.
But that's only halfway.
Mm.
The next piece, obviously, is where he's off. He goes to get his mother. That's a bit of a weird one. But why would he go and get his mother? Well, he's turned his back on her. He didn't know actually, but when he turned his back on her, she actually fell down in the road and had a heart attack. So he's looking for a dead woman. He doesn't know that. He he probably wants to, make amends and show his mum how well he's done and all that sort of stuff is perfectly normal. But he gets lost. He says, his wife says to him, look, we should go and get her. Uh, we can get people to go and get her. No, 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 I'll do it. But I'm scared that, it's dangerous out there. And that's where he announces to his own wife, but I am God's own knight. How can anybody, no one can really get near me, which is the hubris moment. The ego takes over, if you
I'm
like.
invincible. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm invincible. I've got what it takes. I'm special, which is obviously famous last words. He gets lost, completely lost. And eventually, looking for somewhere to stay the night, finds himself in the Grail castle with all these amazing happenings that are going on there. All sorts of knights in banquets and women in fancy clothes walking around and music, and the whole thing was incredible. But he's there with his host, the wounded king, the Amphitas, the Grail King. And instead of asking, what is this? How does this work? What's happening here? Who are you? Are you all right? Or any questions at all? He just listens to the voice of his indoctrination. We could call that. We've all got these things that we're indoctrinated with, but that perhaps impact our behavior.
Don't ask questions. Yeah.
Pardon? Yeah.
Don't ask questions, right? Yeah.
Don't ask questions. It's only fools and spies ask questions.
Mm.
And of course, that's where it all goes wrong. At that point, his destiny is to ask the question, and it doesn't work out. So the people he's met along the way, of course, are the princess, the teacher, the clown, the king. He's met all sorts of people, but now he's lost. He leaves the Grail Castle and he's in the wasteland. The wasteland is where your purpose is. People are of no purpose. The wasteland is where everyone's separate. They're not connected. They're looking down. The rivers are dried up. Or if they're not poisoned. It's a whole every man for himself kind of environment. I think.
The cruelest month. Yeah.
Pardon?
It just reminds me of that first line from the T.S. Eliot poem of the same name, right? The cruelest month. Yeah, the time when everything is just withering and dying.
Cruelest month, yeah. Yeah, winter. Everything's frozen. Yeah. And everybody's kind of like an automaton, Mm. So that's where he drops into this place of despair, really. And he meets the sorceress. Now, the sorceress in this story and many other stories is the capacity of the deep feminine to curse the heroic. She sees him as the hero. She curses him. She said, "You didn't look back at your mother. You killed the Red Knight. You went to the Grail Castle and you didn't ask. Look behind you. You got a trail of devastation behind you, and you think you're so bloody heroic, So he says, well, I'll go back to the Grail Castle and I'll fix it. And she says, well, see what becomes of your arrogance. So we're still working with arrogance there. Mm. And there he goes off into the woods and meets many other knights and fights many, many battles and wins many, many battles, but still is no closer to the Grail Castle. And in despair, really, and in despair. And he calls out to his wife in a dream. And she says, well, why don't you come home now? And he said, I can't come home till I find the Grail. I have to put right what's wrong. She said, well, how did you find it last time? And he said, well, I was lost and I let go of the reins and the horse took me there. She said, well, why don't you try that again? So that's an interesting one, isn't it? It's letting go the reins. Like, we think we're in control,
Mm.
and when that doesn't work, can we trust something that's wiser than us to take us where it takes us, and
Mm.
give up control? And that's the hard one. But that's what he does in the story. He gives up control, and the horse meanders through the woods and eventually takes him to the campfire of an old solitary hermit who's sitting by the fire at prayer. And the first thing that the old hermit says to the young man is, uh, I think you should take off your sword. It's a holy day, and it's not a good time to be carrying arms. And in these old stories, the sword is a metaphor, or often a metaphor, a symbol of the ego. That sharp intellect, which can be so discerning. And he takes off his sword and sits down with the old man. And of course, he's in denial. The world's, poor old me, that I've done my best, and everywhere I turn, it's all going wrong, and I've done nothing but try to be good. And this old figure who is archetypally, it would be what we would call the mentor, a real mentor, not interested in discipline or skills like the old teacher was, but more of a soul friend, really. Says,
Mm.
look, how long are you going to keep being a victim? You're moaning about everybody else, and you're not really taking much responsibility for yourself. And you're not going to find any way out into the light until you find your way into your own darkness.
Ooh.
And he also tells him the story about the Grail, which is what is the Grail? Now, the Grail, in many of the, because there's lots of Grail stories, as you know,
Yeah.
and many of them have been sort of camped on by Christians, and the Grail becomes some sort of a cup or a golden chalice or something that was used at the Last Supper, and it was attached to the Christian story. But in the story that I prefer, the Grail is this black and white stone which has fallen from heaven, or put down from heaven, by the neutral angels, we're told, that refuse to take sides in the war in heaven. So what does that mean? Wow. Well, it means that, we're caught in this polarity of black and white. So as long as I'm pointing out over there that the bad guys, the bad behavior, then I'm obviously on the side of the angels.
Yeah.
So I can congratulate myself on that. But actually, if I can release judgment,
Mm.
and realize that the most things are a spectrum, from a black from a point of view of above, they're all the good and the bad are all just a spectrum.
Yeah.
I always remember in Faust, he sells, or he's thinking about selling his soul to the devil, who in the story is called Mephistopheles. And Faust asks him, who are you? And he said, I am that force for evil which allows the good to happen. In other words, if it wasn't a force for evil, it wasn't a force for
Yeah.
darkness, the light wouldn't mean much. That if the other team don't turn up, there's no game.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
It's I want to just linger on that for a moment because it's such a big
yeah,
point. And also, if you think about it as well, in the case of kind of, uh, we talked about education and indoctrination as well. And
yeah,
that there's always some kind of moral root through a lot of that education where kind of
yes,
not only is God on your side, but those guys aren't on God's side and they need to
yes,
be destroyed or punished as a result.
yes,
And therefore, you somehow have the moral kind of duty to kind of clean the earth up, whether that's from a religious point of
yeah,
view or, we've seen it in nationalism. We might even see some of that
yeah,
playing out in the world right now. And so there's this sort of moralistic center, but why I think this interpretation or this way of kind of seeing this part of the story is so important is because really we're required to step kind of beyond that and
yeah,
see it really as just a spectrum of the same thing
yeah,
operating on the same frequency but just different sides, just different
and
polarities.
operating within ourselves. That's the main
Yes,
part. You know,
at all times. Yeah.
the medicine and the poison, we call it. You know, that until I know that I'm capable of bringing both,
Mm,
I'll unconsciously bring the poison.
mm,
You know, the poison isn't just out there in someone else; it's in me. It's my potential in me.
mm,
And so it's a movement from judgment, that judging others as bad, to discernment. Doesn't mean to say that we have to, you know, discernment means that you just can actually see it for what it is and take your attention, which is really important to what you want. Yeah.
mm.
But it's nothing to do with anybody else. It's the neutral angel is something to be um, acknowledged in ourselves, I think. Yeah. So that's a really key point. Yeah.
When I first heard the neutral angel, it was almost something that I didn't quite, I almost didn't accept it not because of, I had like an emotional reaction to it, but just because the word neutral angel, you think of angels in heaven, the
Yeah. It's
pinnacle
supposed to
of
be good.
light and godliness must be perfect and good and divine. And then neutral is kind of almost this third way or this kind of middle path,
Yeah.
which doesn't take sides and sort of is elevated above the squabble
Yeah.
in such a refreshing way. But it does really challenge you on your kind of on those innate kind of indoctrinated beliefs that we have, like we said in the beginning, where you're
Yeah.
forced to really confront. It isn't so much about good and evil and the big destruction, but rather kind of seeing that third view, kind of
Yes.
elevating beyond that, and then realizing actually I can take responsibility and there's a different way to see this.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a duality. In fact,
Yeah.
if you wanted to make an image of it, it's a trinity.
Mm.
And that third place between the two is the power place, because that's the place of choice. But I have to realize that I do have one. And as long as I'm finding the darkness in someone else, I wouldn't recognize it if it wasn't mine. So that's the whole shadow projection thing that Jungian psychology works with so closely. Yeah. So that idea that the neutral angels, this is a medieval notion. The mutual angels who refused to take sides in the war in heaven brought this black and white stone to earth to inspire as a reminder that we have both medicine and poison within us. Yeah, yeah. The medicine and poison, you can bring either one at any moment, and the more you're aware of it, the more likely you are to have conscious choices. Really. So he tells him all this. This is the hermit in the woods telling him all this story, and he says, "Look," and rather than go off and run off again, which he's been doing the whole time, thinks he's on a purpose quest. He said, "Look, just for once, you just stop here and stay with me, and we can contemplate on these things." So it's a pause, and I think that's a necessary thing too. It's a pause. The life of action, without any contemplation doesn't, it gets meaningless. So we have to actually pause, is what the story tells us. And then, of course, after a while, he meets the old sorceress again. And she says, "Well, you're much changed now." She says, "Yes, I'm willing to take responsibility now. I understand it." She says, "In that case, you're ready then. Come with me." And she takes him to a high old tower on a hill where he can look down across miles and miles of the wasteland and across way on a distant hill. She said, "You see that Saracen over there? A Saracen, someone from a Muslim." She said, "Yeah." So he stands between you and the Grail. And Parzival by this time has said, "Look, we have to be fighting. Is that what we're doing?"
Mm.
She said, "So I'm afraid so." She says she calls it the last battle that must be lost and won, which is very strange. How do you lose a battle and win it at the same time? We don't know. Anyhow, they get there and they meet each other, and neither of them will give way. You're in my way. Okay. No, the truth is you're in my way. So you can tell there's trouble. So what is it we're trying to do here? We're reaching an opposition. We're reaching the dark brother, which we could use imagine as the darkness in ourselves, really, I suppose.
A reflection of himself, right?
Probably, yeah. The idea that we can kill our enemy, and he's been doing that for years. It hasn't made any difference.
Mm.
Can you really kill your enemy? Not if the enemy's in you. Yeah.
Oof.
So they fight, and there's a lovely in the telling of the story, which is retold beautifully by Lindsay Clark. Uh, he says that they're so intense. This fighting is so intense. They're so bound up with each other that the whole scene looks like a wounded animal strangely warring with itself. The two of them are so fine. And eventually, the it's the sword that he's been. I didn't tell you, but he was. I forgot to tell you. He was given a sword by the Grail King, and the prophecy was that the sword would hold well for a while, but fail in its moment of greatest need. And the Saracen stumbles, giving Parzival a moment of opportunity where he seeks to finish the whole fight by crashing his sword down onto the head of the Saracen. So he intends to kill him. But what happens is the sword shatters into 1,000 shards like broken glass all over the place, broken. And so now it's his turn to wait for his fate, his destiny. And he's waiting for in the moment that he's waiting for the response from the Saracen, he takes his mind back to the forest where he was brought up and how he's connected to nature and the peacefulness of it all. And he even takes off his helmet and waits for the blow, the final blow to dispatch him from this world. But what he hears is the Saracen sheathing his sword and who says, there can be no winners and losers in this because of what happened. Mm. So they find a mutual respect and a connection because of the ill-fated sword, really, the sword of destiny, which broke. And at this point, Kundry, the sorceress, appears and she says, now you're ready to go to the Grail Castle. Now you're ready. He's surrendered. In other words,
because the battle was lost and won.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Lost and won. And by losing it, he won it. Or by losing it, they both won it. Yeah. There can be no talk of winners and losers in such a thing. And that's where they go to the Grail Castle. He says, "Can I take my brother with me?" And my dark brother with me. She says, "Well, you couldn't really get there without him. Really, we all need to take our shadow with us." Yeah. And he meets the Grail King again, who's in agony. He's this, and this time, instead of worrying about what he sounds like or everything, he allows himself to connect with his heart, see the old man in agony, moaning and really suffering, and he manages to find compassion and says, in the old story it says, what ails the uncle, or we might say now, how can I help you? What can I do for you? In some sense of compassionate service. And at that moment, because of that connection, suddenly all of the wasteland is redeemed, and the flowers begin to bloom, and the trees begin to blossom, and everyone, So that's the nature of it all. Is that the compassion and connectedness, and will win out over a sense of selfish purpose. I mean, when we talk, I think we were talking about purpose. It depends on what the purpose is. If my purpose, his purpose at the beginning of the story was about himself, what he could achieve and become.
Self-serving.
Yeah, self-service. And so there are two types of people. There's the self-serving people and the service to others people. And it's the service to others that actually brings connection, brings health, brings support, safety, all those things. A service to self, that's the wasteland. That's me looking after myself, and I don't really care about you. And everyone's for himself. That's the juxtaposition we're being confronted with in this old story.
But at the same time, there's an interesting kind of requirement there to still do some of the work, or almost like a kind of a necessary amount of selfishness in a way still, because it requires you through that to then get to the point where you can reflect on your actions and take responsibility. And maybe
Yes.
selfish is not the right word, but there's a sort of a need to first establish, okay, this is
Yeah.
what I can do, this is what I can't do, and then be able to serve outwards from that point.
Yeah. You have to be able to look at the impact of your own shadow
Yeah.
on others, which you
Mm.
did, and take responsibility for it. Exactly right. Yeah.
Mm.
Which is the initiatory path. Most of the initiations are like that. It moves from the ego of my independence and my prosperity, my me, until it moves from dependence from the mother to independence, and then the realization, of course, of interdependence, which is the way forward. That whole idea of interdependence through the heart. The heart is the key, because that's what, this is the instrument that connects us. It actually, we're told, has an electromagnetic field which moves out at least 2 meters from the body, so it connects us. And this clever thing up here is what separates us, I think. That's what the story's trying to tell us, I think. So there's lots in that story. There's lots of little pieces in there. And when we tell that story, it's amazing how people get caught up in tiny little details that obviously are reflections of their own life,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What should I do now?
It's quite I mean, it obviously follows the arc of a lot of familiar types of stories in a way, because
Yeah.
that's how we also tell stories and get used to hearing them. And so it makes sense that there's the arcs and the kind of the slowdown and the climax and so on. But it is also quite unique because there's so many kind of parts to it where there are these sort of, yeah, it's very multivariate in a way, where there's kind of big kind of realizations, and then it sort of doesn't go where you think it might go.
Yeah.
And then there's the brother in the end that shows up. And so it's kind of fantastical, but also feeds into, it almost doesn't matter if it's not true. And that's kind of the big gift of mythology
No,
in
it
a way,
doesn't matter
right?
at all.
It has its own truth value, independent of whether it was realistic. It actually happened on this date,
Well, the Gnostics, their big idea, I suppose, was this whole idea of unity consciousness, that all is one. And you can imagine the massive transformation that would occur if human culture spread that idea, completely change everything.
Mm.
Once we understand ourselves to be kind of essentially kind of kindred, we become much more, I don't know, tolerant, generous, cooperative, altruistic, changes everything, absolutely everything. So mythology in itself, I mean, all of the stuff that's, when we talked about originally the subconscious mind, basically what that's full of is your personal mythology. Yeah, the things that you have bought into, that only it's a unique set of beliefs. But belief is a bit of a craft's word, really, compared to the conclusions, assumptions, and the experiences of all those things that have accumulated over the years. And what matters really is whether that personal mythology, in brings us health. We feel lighter. We feel aligned with it, or it either keeps us in our special self, looking out for ourselves, finding opposition and enemies, and having to work it out and manipulate and things like that. Depending on our purpose, really, which is yeah.
Yeah.
But the myth of the Grail reminds us that we have to ask the right question. And are we asking the right questions, really? I love all that idea about asking questions. We should question everything, shouldn't we, really? That's my thing anyway.
Well, that's such a, it's true. It's a great kind of lesson in a way from that particular story where, if we're looking at things in a modern context, and we can kind of still be pulling out these gems, these lessons, or these kind of realizations from stories that, are seemingly, completely disconnected about other people who might or might not have lived thousands of years ago in another place we've never been to, but yet the experience is still familiar and relatable.
Yes.
And you bring that into a modern context where, we're kind of isolated and sort of removed from other people, from ourselves. We're sort of also deeply unfulfilled, especially amongst younger people as well. We're kind of looking for purpose, even though life is easier and more convenient than ever. It's this great dichotomy which creates so much sort of guilt and just this sort of weird cloud of feelings that that are really difficult to kind of put back together so that you
Yeah.
feel like, okay, I understand now. I can kind of figure out for myself. But it seems that so much of what we can decode comes from looking at these stories and sort of applying them in a way, applying what we can learn from them.
Yeah. I mean, more than ever now, youngsters are caught up in technology which has no mythology.
Mm.
Pornography, for instance, or just those video games that are all about ascending progress and getting more, accumulating gold coins or whatever you do. And so the youngsters can lose themselves in that, thinking that's what is meaningful.
Mm.
I feel sorry. I mean, that's one of the things that, and what that does is it isolates us, didn't it? Between us and the technology, we're on our own.
Mm.
We become scattered and disconnected. And, we're listening to TV, even TV stuff now with the most popular soap operas. And they're all about communities, aren't they?
Mm.
So
Yes, true.
we're trying to get vicarious community from the television rather than the real world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
They
insane when you put it like that.
yeah, EastEnders and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if you get that where you are, but
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think
Yeah.
Coronation Street is another one in UK.
Classic.
Going
Yeah.
for donkey's years. People know more people in EastEnders or Coronation Street than they do in the real life.
But
And that's a terrifying thought, actually. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting though, just to dig into that for a moment, because we seem to also, as part of our condition, maybe this is because we're social animals or we just enjoy it, but there is that Schadenfreude in a way, right? We kind of get off on the drama of others, whether or not we intend to, or we go out of our way to try and not do it. But there is still kind of a dial somewhere inside of our physiology which enjoys, or maybe not enjoys, a little bit strong, but kind of almost can feel a sense of triumph when it's like, oh, at least that's not happening to me.
Yeah.
And that's a funny one, isn't it? Yeah.
At least I'm safe in my own little bubble.
Mm.
Yeah. So this idea of purpose and story, they are all linked really, the key difference between, is the purpose just about me, or is the purpose in service to other people? I think that's where it becomes meaningful, and therefore myths can actually lay that out for us, and that's what happens in the Grail story. At a certain point, it becomes not about him, about what he can serve and what difference he can make to something beyond himself.
Yeah. It's a very sort of almost, it's kind of an existential sort of conclusion to make. It's kind of quite forward thinking in a way, compared, from where that story was originally told. You didn't have French existentialists in Wales in the 10th century, but like there's something kind of quite cool in a way about seeing that as a sort of an old story, but with quite a modern edge in a way to it. Especially that conclusion that you're not, God doesn't anoint you, but you can turn up and you can kind of find your own God within yourself, and then from there do good and spread that outwards.
Yeah, again, you go back to the Gnostics with that. The Jung, who, we all know who Jung is, but he referred to the Gnostics and said that they were the original psychologists. Way back then. And of course, they didn't have a lot of rules and a lot of dogma. So all their influence spread into different other sects, and it kind of went into different other nomenclatures. And of course, the church wanted. The church didn't want people. They wanted to be the intermediaries between the human beings and the divine. Yeah. So they didn't want anyone telling them that you could find the divine within yourself. That was a subversive thing to suggest. So the Gnostics have had a hard time over the years. But one of the links down the years was to the Cathars. I don't know if you heard of the Cathars.
No.
The 12th century. They were slaughtered wholesale by the popes. They were the, I suppose, the descendants of the Gnostics. The Gnostics' idea was that we each have to find the story within ourselves that we live out, and we're all interconnected. And once we understand ourselves to be interconnected, and we act accordingly. but there's no God in the sky who's actually judging us or whatever it is other than ourselves.
Yeah.
But that didn't sit well with the church, who obviously wanted to create some sort of institution which is influential, or if not powerful and controlling.
Well, yeah, because it destabilizes their hold on
Yeah.
their morality and therefore their power. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, without kind of getting into too much of the modern scenario and what's going on in the world, blah blah blah. Are there certain tools that we can kind of look at and equip ourselves with from these ancient stories, perhaps not just the one with Parzival, but where we can be having a space where we can have a conversation, a constructive conversation with someone, especially if they don't see eye to eye with us or where we don't agree with them? Is there a way, or are there certain things that we can do or say or behave in a certain way that allow us to make some progress beyond just letting it descend into a screaming match? Because that just happens
I mean,
so often.
if you notice the stories you're drawn to, and then you notice the characters in those stories that you're drawn to, there's always what we say. There's always me search in your research. There's something about that character which is reflected of you. Yeah. So if you look at that character, well, why am I so interested in that? It's obviously because it's reflecting me somehow, and just explore that, and walk into that, And if you were that character, would you behave in the same way, or where would you find redemption? So just trust your own attention. What you're drawn to really is the best. Meeting the story with your own story, which is the way mythology works, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and very.
And that, like you say, that this Parzival story is 1,000 years old or something. But there are stories that are happening now in the real world on the level, at the very highest levels. Who are we siding with, and what is their mythology, and where do we find ourselves in the stories that we're interested in? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to see it. Yeah.
Mm.
When is the book coming out? When can we look forward to reading the full thing?
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. Yeah. Hopefully, where are we now? Spring. Hopefully I'll have a manuscript done by the end of the year, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay,
There's just so much in that particular story. There's just so much in it,
Yeah.
It's hard to know where to stop, So, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
We used to do a lot with Shakespeare stories. And of course, there are marvelous characters in there, but very complex.
Yes.
And yeah, but in the Parzival story, there's not so much depth of character, but there are, you can recognize them as people that the grieving woman, the mother who won't let go, the woman who curses the men, for the right reasons, all that.
Yeah.
So they're all there in a modern sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Just on that, and it's something that I have thought about a little bit in relation to, I suppose, what you can see now on Netflix, at the theaters, what Hollywood puts out as this kind of real decline in quality, especially in modern, I suppose modern movies specifically. You can argue that with literature or maybe some art, but let's just confine it to films lately. And I think so much of that has come from this trend of almost trying to divorce the kind of staple characters that you get in kind of the way that stories are told, and making them more kind of ambiguous and sort of less well defined and almost more kind of psychologically complex, which has its own. There's some artistry in that, but at the same time, it's hard to kind of tell and to enjoy, I suppose, a full kind of fully able-bodied story when you've got characters which are kind of almost at war with themselves too much, rather than trying to effect a plot in a way. And that's what's beautiful in a way about these kind of ancient stories, is because you've got these very kind of clear and defined good, evil, crazy, jealous sort of stories or characters, and they play their role, and then there's a sort of a payoff in the conclusion. you know.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't feel that so much with kind of modern movies and all that. It's all kind of too nebulous and kind of like there isn't that satisfaction of the conclusion.
Most of them are designed to sell tickets, aren't they?
Well,
So,
yeah.
you know, there's a lot of special effects which substitutes for the quality of a story, and there's, as you say, there's a lot of in-depth psychological stuff which some of it can, you know, it can be quite disconcerting, I think. So yeah. I notice that when there's a great story, I'm really riveted to I saw a film the other day, The Gentleman. Have you seen that? No.
Guy Ritchie.
Guy Ritchie, yeah.
Oh yeah.
What a great story. Just fun, you know, and it had a narrator in it, and it kept going back in time, and you know, it was just well put together story. Definitely. And had some really strong characters in it. Whereas a lot of things that we're if you weed out the story of some of the special effects stuff, there's very little in it, really. Bad guy makes good or something like that. Yeah. But there isn't a lot of superficiality around the appearance, often at the expense of the depth. Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's well said.
I saw it with that thing. I always remember that someone said, our consciousness is molded by the sacred story to which it awakens. And I don't think our stories are sacred enough. You know, they're not sacred. They're kind of mundane. And if you want to uplift someone, you've got to give them a sacred story. And the Grail story is a sacred story. You know, it realizes that there are things in this world which are worth preserving, and we have an effect, and we have a responsibility to have an impact on them. Yeah.
Some sacred cows. Yeah.
Yeah. So where there is no sacred story, there's no sacredness, and we're into the mundane. Yeah.
And we lose it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That was
Thank
awesome.
you so much for the invitation and to chat.